Hey, everybody. Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have one of the most interesting conversations we've ever had on this podcast. We're on with Baris Vural. And Baris, you are a CRO, and we are talking about something that not all CROs really talk a lot about, the absolute importance of understanding your ICP at the deepest level that then accelerates every part of your go-to-market strategy. What I would love, though, is if you wouldn't mind, just give us 30 seconds, a little bit of a background on you before we dig in.
Yeah, great to have you and great to meet you, Steve, as well. I'm the CRO at Smartlinx. I've spent a lot of time of my career in sales, in marketing development, in sales development, and solution engineering in software companies. Small, large, big, private equity, public, you name it, been there, done that. And I'm really excited to talk about the most important thing to me, which is, I believe, the crux of getting the go-to-market correct, which is the persona behind the ICP, who you're selling to, and what problems are you solving in the ICP. And I literally spent all my career trying to figure that out, and it's not easy. It's very complex, but I think we can break that down into chunks that are manageable, and I'm happy to bring my experience to it.
Well, great, because you're doing some really innovative things. But I wanted to start out by saying, tell us a little bit about how you think about the ICP and why it's that important.
I'm going to define this. It's how do your customers define success and outcomes from the solutions that they use? And how do they quantify and qualify the value that they get? And sometimes even us, I mean, we've been around for 35 years. We kind of know what our customers and prospects need, but they're constantly changing, right? They're
Yes.
constantly pivoting, and they're constantly, a lot of regulations come up, a lot of different tailwinds and headwinds. So we focus on the who first, like with the persona-based value creation. Actually, like even before we talk about ICP, we talk about long-term value creation. We think about CX, we think about all of those things. Let's really get obsessed about the persona that we are actually solving for. And the day in the life, I always tell my team, I'm like, all right, we always sell to the CFO or the CEO, right? At the end of the day, well, sometimes CHRO, the head of HR or the head of finance, or it gets to the CEO, depending on the size of the organization. And we almost have to be obsessed with the day in the life of these people. Like, how do they think about, with regards to our solution and the problems that we solved for them, what do they think? How do they wake up every morning thinking about the problems that we help them solve? Are they as critical as we think they are? Are they changing for whatever reason? The ranking of the problems and the challenges that we help them solve, is that ranking is number one going now to number five, and is number five going up to number one, right? And that ranking, that priority of, I call it the menu of problems, the menu of challenges, sometimes in our industry, healthcare, in vertical, changes all the time. Again, new regulation comes up, a new compliance issue, something that has to do with patient care. All of a sudden, the CFOs or CEOs are scrambling, right? Kind of like yesterday, the second floor was on fire. And so we had people just like attending to that. Today, second floor seems to be okay. Now the basement is flooding. And so we're just going to go to the basement. And I'm using that analogy because literally every day it changes. So I think our salespeople, our marketing, as we are connecting with these people via email, social, events, what have you, we need to be thinking about what's keeping them up at night, and how those things are changing. So I think that's the start of it. In my opinion, we always start with where they are and how they're thinking about these industry headwinds. And I call it the crisis du jour. I talk to 10 or 20 CEOs and CFOs every week, and I ask that question. I'm like, all right, Steve, so what's the crisis du jour today?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, and then I talk to them the following week, and it's constantly changing, right? So like, I can't even keep
It
up.
says it all so quickly that it's always a crisis and it's always different and it's always changing. In 2 words, you just said that.
As CROs and as go-to-market teams, if we can get ourselves grounded on the common theme that emerges, the common 3, 4 things that emerges from these conversations, and they have to be conversations. They cannot be on an email. They can definitely not be on a chat GPT. They have to be human to human conversations. When you're talking to the buyer, to the persona who writes the check. And I think what emerges from that, I pay attention to that emergence. And then you always come up with three common themes. And then your messaging, then your ICP just becomes clearer the moment that you clarify those three things that emerge. Next quarter, maybe one of them still true. The other two have changed, right? So that's how you keep up with the trend of your persona. And it always comes down to the persona who is the persona that you're trying to sell to. And I like, you have to immerse yourself. I always tell my team, my customer success team, my sales team and marketing team, and this is the alignment conversation, is like, as long as we're all aligned between what the prospects are saying from the same industry, what the customers are saying from the same industry, and that collaboration between the customer success team, the CSMs and the account managers and the account executives align, now we're all talking the same language, right? We're all catering to the same 3, 4, 5 things: the crises of the month, the crises of the quarter, crises of the year, right? They start emerging, and that's how you differentiate your value from the rest.
I purposely wanted to get your unbridled reaction to that, because there's a CMO I had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he said, if I understand my ICP better than my competitors, even if I have a better product or just as good a product, but I can cater to their needs, I can show them that I understand, that I get it. If you have that deep understanding and those conversations like you're having with these CEOs and everything, as you're learning about their crisis du jour, you're just learning about what their life is, right?
Yeah.
And I guarantee, I'm going to go out on a limb here, that there's rarely a conversation you have with one of them where you're not pulling from a conversation over here. And I was talking to this gentleman or this person over here, and they're like, not only do you get it,
Yeah.
but they don't talk to their peer community like
So
you
true.
did, right?
So true. So true.
This is one of the things that I learned when I started doing this podcast. So I've interviewed now over 100 B2B C-suite executives. Most people that I talk to in your position, or CMOs or CEOs, they have not talked to hardly anybody in their peer community. Really. And so not because Steve or Baris is the smartest guys in the world, but we end up representing the peer community of who you're talking to. That wants you into a position as a peer, not a seller. It goes beyond, I think, the like Gartner trusted advisor kind of status that we're supposed to be in. Is that they really truly, because also what you're doing, when they talk about the crisis du jour, they're not always talking about what you do and how you could solve it.
Right.
They want you to talk about all of these crises, everything.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. And I'm glad you say that, because so yesterday I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and then we had a customer advisory board meeting, and we had 20 executives, we had 20 C-suite customers who use our product. And I asked the question, I'm like, how often you guys talk, like how often you guys collaborate?
Yeah.
Because one of the key takeaways from the 3-hour meeting was we're not talking enough, and we're not leveraging, and we're not picking our brains, because we're all facing the same problems.
Right.
We're all trying to we all have the same crises that we're all dealing with. Some of us are dealing with it differently than the others, but all this is all the same stuff, right? And in fact, one of the CFOs said, I would love to steal ideas from you, and I want you to steal my ideas if they're great. And I think that notion of, yes, we are competitors. And by the way, these people are competitors, right? Because they're in the same community, but them sitting in the room and saying, we don't mind having a lot of these conversations, right? As long as we're not sharing confidential information to talk about our problems. I think when people talk about their challenges and the problems, automatically, whether it's related to our product or our solution, or whether we can help them or not, because most of those things we cannot help them, right? But there's two that we can help with. They can literally talk about 8 or 9 things, and they're really not looking for solutions. The one thing that I realize is sometimes people just want to talk about their challenges, and they're not looking for the magic wand, some magician to come in and say, I'm going to make all of them disappear, right? But I think what they're looking for is, I'm going to dump a lot of issues on you. And then if you understand my business, if you understand me as the persona, and if you can offer one idea, one solution, I'm okay. I'll take that. You know, I'm not looking for 5 or 10. If you can give me one, fantastic. That's one less problem than I have to deal with.
That offsite where you gathered with all your clients and you gave, that is part of the customer experience, right? That you just created. And at the same time, as you bringing it together, you became a trusted peer in that environment, right? So here's the difference. I just heard about this in probably a stat from like years ago, but that on average across 4,000 recorded sales conversations, that the rep talked 85% of the time. So that has to be part of the customer experience, right? Is that process. It has to be a part of that, right? But it's not, if you're talking 85% of the time and you're listening 15%, and you're only talking about this, what we do, you're not talking about this, and it's a guarded conversation to begin with. To your point, these human to human conversations to understand their crisis du jour, what their life is really about, we have to create those opportunities. They are not going to naturally happen in our go-to-market motion, right?
Right. It's true.
Yeah. So that's where most B2B companies fall short.
Yeah. I think there is a sense of, when people share, it's so funny. It's the human psychology, isn't it? Like when people share common problems and challenges and goals, all of a sudden, organically, you have a camaraderie. Like, it always becomes a tribe, right? A tribe that kind of protects one another, like watches for each other's back, like trust is formed because now you and I are going through the same challenging path.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
We share, like, we're in this together. We're
Yes.
either going to lead together or we're going to win together. I think majority of humans want to help. They want to help through, and nobody wants to do it alone. One of the common key takeaways is like jokingly stealing from one another. Obviously, yes, me. What are you doing? What are the best practices? What am I missing? What am I missing out that I can learn from you? But hey, look, rather than competing, somebody used the word, what is the word? Coopetition, cooperate, but then compete, but then we need to cooperate. I think when that emerges, you're right. Like when that thought leadership, that trust is formed out of a community, tribal community, or whatever you want to refer it to as, we call it customer advisory board. But in fact, this is a community, right? Community that shares ideas, shares problems, shares all of these things. And I think eventually it leads to your solution. It leads to some type of a resolution, because I think humans, at the end of the day, we like to complain about our problems, but I think we're also very outcome focused. Like we want some of those problems to be solved. We're always looking for a hero, somebody to come up and say, hey, I think there's a better future. There's a better life that we can help with.
I'll ask you another opinion on this. So that is what podcasting is. It's not a group coming together, but it's that human to human. Every single week, we're going to produce a podcast episode. So every week we talk to somebody that is in the community of who we sell to. And not in that sales context, not in the customer success context, not in the customer support context, in a crisis du jour context, right? Learning. And what's phenomenal about that, and like when you brought that community together, you don't know what you're going to get out of it. There's this leap of faith that you have to say, if I get in and if I talk and I listen, I'm going to learn. Right? And who does that best has the best understanding of their persona, their ICP, therefore has the best ability to, when you first started talking about how do we create success and outcomes, we need to be delivering experience. But in order to do that, everything you're talking about, we have to have a deep, deep understanding of who it is that we're trying to create that experience for.
Absolutely, Stephen. I think you give the prospect or the customer a glimpse of what that experience is going to look like by having that thought leadership, consultative conversation. And I always tell my team, the best way to build credibility with customers is when you're coming up from a place of curiosity, right? And you just tell the CFO or whoever, your CISO or CIO or whatever the persona that you're talking to is, rather than asking them what are the top 3 things that are keeping them up at night, is you tell them, you say, look, I just did a customer advisory board meeting and 20 CIOs showed up, and 3 ideas or 3 issues that actually emerge. And number 1, number 2, number 3, does that resonate? Are you
Right. Right.
And they immediately go, whoa, this guy's speaking my language. And he just said that he talked to 20 other CIOs. I think I should get connected to this community. All of a sudden they're thinking,
Yes.
because the more of these conversations that you have, not only you are being more educated about your persona, but also it helps you ask the right questions. Salespeople make this mistake. And I always tell my team, I'm like, don't lead with the product and the features and the functionality. Like you said, like we can do all those 10 things. Like, do you know the right questions to ask about those 10 things that will help you build credibility with a CISO, right? Because CIOs, like I'm a CRO, I get a lot of sales pitches. And when the other person on the call is really asking smart questions to me, really gets down to the nerve, like it touches a nerve. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there are smart questions, and then there are dumb questions, and then there are questions in between, right? Smart C-suites, they immediately know the person that they're talking to is asking them a really deep, meaningful
Right.
question, engages them. And that becomes a very meaningful conversation versus, what do you use for CRM? What do you like? Like what questions are so stupid and no executive wants to spend their time? Like they're going to hang up on you, right?
Right.
You got to put a lot of time into how thoughtful and how your questions have to be thought provoking, but at the same time, it's got to challenge them, but it's got to also come from this place of curiosity, but also it's got to come from all the conversations that you've accumulated
Yes.
talking same persona, right?
You just gave me
Yeah.
like a phenomenal idea. So your customer advisory board,
Yeah.
and as much as you're lighting up about that for all the right reasons, what I'm thinking is, why shouldn't it be an ICP advisory?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't it be prospects, organizations you haven't even talked to from a sales perspective yet, right?
Yeah.
One of the groups is the deals in pipeline. One of the groups is customers, and especially our biggest revenue expansion customers. One is prospects, the organizations we haven't even opened the door on.
Yeah.
We haven't even started the conversation with, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the goal is to bring them on and transition them to a prospect, right?
Sure.
It doesn't always
Sure.
happen because 95% of the market isn't in the market right away. But
Right.
why couldn't they be a part of a community? They want to come on to the podcast because they want to know what's going on. They also want to be recognized in their career, and everybody understands their own thought leadership and their own personal brands and different things. But the next step should be inviting them into a community of their peers.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful, Steve. I'm telling you, that is so powerful. And I think you're right. You gave me an idea. So I'm going to steal your idea. Utilizing that customer advisory board is expanding that to making that about the ICP, because I think if you do it smartly and if you do it intentionally, it almost leads itself to who's my ICP and who's not. Right?
Hey,
Like, you can literally sit in that room and not even open your mouth, because what was beautiful yesterday, and we do this quarterly and we do it regionally. This is Midwest, and we're going to do Northeast. We do Southeast. We try to make it convenient for customers not to travel long distances. We try to keep that close to them. What's nice is you ask the question and you get them to engage on a topic. You pick a topic, believe me, the topics are those 4 or 5 things that
Yes.
emerge, right? And then you see everybody's leaning in. Everybody's kind of like, and then you sit back, honestly, you shut up. And I tell my team, I'm like, don't open your mouth, just shut up, right? And listen.
yeah,
What are you listening for? You're listening for commonality. You're listening for your ICP. You're listening for what are the things that they're agreeing on? What are the things that they're challenging each other on? What are the
Right.
things that they're having a disagreement on it, which is fine, which is also helps you define your ICP. As a CRO, it's all about efficiency. It's all about customer acquisition costs. It's all about having your company focus on the right targets. Because if you're talking to the wrong ICP, you drag your entire company along with you, and now your efficiency drops, your customer acquisition costs skyrockets, right? And your
Your retention rate increases, your NRR goes into the toilet,
right,
yeah.
right.
The tendency is to kind of like say, well, let's bring these outliers in a little bit, right? You know, where it's
Correct. And that's CRO's job. I always tell people, if the company is, when I say the company, I'm talking about my BDRs, my SDRs, my marketing, my account executives, my account managers. Everybody that touches that prospect, from lead gen all the way to close, and literally waste their time because they were not the ICP. It acted like an ICP. It smelled like it, but it really didn't. It looked like it, but actually didn't. And then the whole company got dragged along. Imagine how much time we have wasted on that ICP. And if you extrapolate it, if you have 5 and 10 and 20 of those, my God, think about your efficiency as a company.
Yeah.
Right? To your point, salespeople, marketing people, this goes back to the alignment. If they're not aligned on that ICP, they're chasing. They don't know what they're chasing, but they're chasing this thing that is not really going to convert. That is on the CRO. That is on the CMO. That's on the CRO to tightly define. You gave me a great idea. That customer advisory board, using that as defining the ICP, is the right approach.